For this week's example in CIST 1520, we're going to look at chapter 11's case problem number 3. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at building functions, event handlers, working with variables, and different JavaScript events. So the project itself is you're going to be building a crossword puzzle. This is not an assignment or a lab that's been assigned to you. But in this example, we're going to be working on this crossword puzzle. The two files that in this lab that I work with is my HTML and my JavaScript file. And what we're doing is we're giving this functionality so that our web page will respond to events such as clicking, space bar events, and so forth. All right, so we're going to start off by putting our name and date into our two files, and then we need to link in our files, our JavaScript file, and a CSS into our excuse me, our HTML file. We'll see that when we do this, that it's going to change the way this is laid out. So we already have our CSS laid in here. So we've already put that in. Now you'll notice in instructions in this lab, it tells us to look at the information in our PC world where we have our data, where it's given the asterisk. Because that's just saying look at the everything. So the asterisk in this case can be the data dash left, the data dash up, data dash letter. It's just the data dash and then wildcard. Whatever comes after that, that's what the asterisk takes the place of. All right, so we're going to move on now. And I've closed my preview as much as possible and my file so that we can actually see what's going on. So we're going to go into our PC world, into our JavaScript. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to declare some variables. Okay, so in here, you'll see that in the comments, it's telling you what each section of this JavaScript file does. First, we're going to declare some global variables. I'm going to move the predefined functions down. Okay, so global variables, these are things that are going to reside outside of a function that allows us to call them inside different functions. So we see the first couple steps here is that we're going to declare the variables all letters, current letter, word letters, so forth. So the first 6 we go through, 5 is just declaring variables. On the 6th one with top direction, we are going to set it to an initial value of right. So when we declare variables, once again, we start off with the keyword variable, then we give it the name of the variable. In the situation here, we do set this to right. So now we're going to move on to looking at adding a command so that we run this init function when this page loads. All right, so what we'll do is use the window object, and we'll say that on load, we're going to run the init function. So we'll go ahead and do a quick check on these two and have these pass. Now we're going to go into creating the init function itself. All right, so inside of this function, I'm going to give it some room here. First, we're going to set the all letters to reference the elements using the selector of the table crossword span. So we're declaring a variable. We're setting that variable of all letters, which is one of our global variables. We're pulling it inside this function. While inside this function, we're going to set it to the value given here. We're also going to set the current letter to reference the first letter or the first object in the all letters collection. We're setting this as an array. 0 is the first element in an array, so we set this to 0. Then we're going to declare a couple of variables using the across ID, and we're going to set that to equal value to the data-clue A, and then make that's an attribute for the current letter. And then we're going to do the same thing for the down ID. So we have the variable cross ID. We're setting it to current letter, and then the attributes for current letter, in this case, clue A and clue D. Next, we're going to set the value for across clue to reference an element with the ID attribute across ID. Then we're going to set the value of the down clue to reference an element with the ID of down ID. Once again, we're going to look here. So we'll look at across clue. We're setting this to the document, and we're saying get element by ID. The current letter, which is what's set here. So what we set the across ID to, this value here, this is being passed into and setting the across clue to that current letter. Now, as we progress through this, you'll see that I have a lot more functions down here, these other three functions. I will be putting information in these functions. I will build these functions and then also place information back into the init function to call that information back. So now we're going to look at the format puzzle function. So once again, I'm going to give us a little bit of room here to work with. So this is function is going to format the colors of the crossword table, the cells in that to the clues based on the letter that the user selects. The function is going to have that single parameter of puzzle letter, and we're going to add these commands to it. So we see we have a function, format puzzle, and then we have the parameter of the puzzle letter that's been passed into this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the value of the current letter to the puzzle letter. So we do that by setting current letter equal to puzzle letter. Next, we're going to remove the current colors in the puzzle by looping through all items in the all letters object collection. And we're going to change the background color style to each to an empty text string. So we're going to do this. We're going to create a for loop. So the for loop goes through and tests each element, each item in this object collection, in this array. So we're going to look and say for, and we're going to use variable I, and we're setting the initial value to 0. And we're saying as long as I is less than the all letters dot length. So they're saying as long as it's less than the values of the objects in all letters, the number of objects, we're going to run this loop. And then we have the end of it where we are, each time we run through it, we're going to increase the value of I by 1. So the first time this is I equals 0. Second time it runs through the loop, it becomes I equals 1. And so each time it's going to test I here. So first it says is 0 less than all the objects in all letters. Let's say, for example, we've got 26 letters in the alphabet. So we say is 0, as long as 0 is less than 26, we're going to run this loop. They run the loop, they increase I by 1. So the next time it goes through, it says, okay, as long as 1 is less than 26, run the loop. And this will keep going until eventually that statement is no longer true, and then we will exit out of the for loop. So each time it runs through, we'll look, and we're going to take the style for the all letters, and we're setting the background color, and we're setting it to an empty text string. So now after the for loop in this, we're now going to remove the highlighting of the current clues by changing the colors of the cross clue and down clue to an empty text string. So just what we did, as you see with the for loop. In this case, we're just going to set the across clue style color to empty. Okay, so the same thing here where they've got the background color. We're just going to set the style and color to empty for the across clue and down clue. Okay, so next we're going to do some testing on this. So we're going to determine whether there exists an across clue for the current letter by testing whether the current letter dot dataset clue A is not equal to undefined. So we're going to do an if statement. So we're going to say if this condition exists, so if the current letter dataset clue A is not equal to undefined, if we find that is true, we are going to set the across clue to reference the element by ID of the current letter dataset clue A. We're also going to change the color to blue. And we're going to set the word letters to reference all elements selected by the CSS selector. We're going to say across clue. We're going to set it to the get element by ID for this current letter dataset clue A. We're going to change the across clue style to blue. And then we're setting the word letters to reference the element selected by the CSS. We're also now going to look and we're going to change the background color style for every item in the word letters to the light blue color. So we're going to go through a for loop. We're going to run through this and make sure that every one of our items that is changed. So once again, we're testing, same as we did up in this area. We're testing the variable I. We're setting initial value to 0 as long as 0 is less than word letters. It's going to run through this loop. And every time it goes through the loop, it's going to set that color to the light blue color value here in RGB. Okay, step 5 of this, we're just going to repeat the step 4 for the down clue. Not just this step 4, but the entire step 4 here. Okay, all the way down through subset 4. So we're going to set this for clue D. A couple things there in there, though, we are changing the color to red instead of blue. Make sure you have clue D and clue A and all that correctly if you do this on your own. Okay, now we're going to indicate the typing direction for the current letter. So if the type direction is set to right, we're going to change the background color of the current letter to a blue. Otherwise, we're going to change the color to a red. So once again, this is going to be an if statement, if else statement. So we're going to run it and check. We're going to say if this happens, do this action. If not, do the other action. So we're going to say if the top direction is right, we're going to set the style background color to this RGB value of blue. If this statement is not true, so if the top direction is not right, this is going to right. So it's going to test this first. If it is true, this runs. If it's not true, it runs this. Okay, I'm going to go down and I'm going to show you that we have a lot of steps that we have to go through here. So we're going to check a few of these off. This one will not check off yet. We have not added the format puzzle to the init function. The reason why this did not check off, and this is what I wanted to happen, is you will see that I have a lot of these closing brackets here. Okay, in this situation, I have one too many. Okay, so in that case, I've got a open closing bracket doesn't have a closing. I mean, a closing bracket doesn't have an opening bracket. So you'll make sure that you have your brackets correctly. You see now it has passed. So I'm gonna go back up to my init function. And let's go back up to our instructions. So we're now in the event handler. So we'll return the init function, and we're going to add these to the format puzzle, or to apply the format puzzle into this function. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add this into the function. So we're going to say the format puzzle, and we're calling the current letter that's being passed into the format puzzle function. We see here. Next one says users should be able to select a puzzle cell using their mouse. We're going to loop through all of the items in the all letters object collection. And for each item, we're going to change the cursor style to pointer. We're going to add an on mouse down event. That runs an anonymous function calling the format puzzle function. And it's going to use the event object as the parameter value. So we're going to put this in. But once again, we're running through a for loop. We're going through each item in the all letters, as it says here. So we're going to use all letters dot length. We're going to set the style of the cursor to pointer. We have a on mouse down event that's going to call the format puzzle, and it's going to use the event object target as the parameter value. The next part here is also in this init function. I'm going to add a document that on key down that allows me to runs a select letter function, so that this runs based on when the on key function occurs. Okay, so we've not created a select letter function yet. So this is something we have to create now. So we'll come down to our select letter function. We're going to create this. We're going to declare some variables first. Use the keyword, and we're going to use the variable name it gives us. We'll set these values to reference the letter to the left, right, above, and below the current letter selected. So we're looking at the current letter that's being passed for each one of these, as he tells us here in the hints on this one of what we can actually use for those. We're also going to store the code for the key that's pressed in the value of a variable of user key. So we declare the user key, and we're storing the value in a key code property. We're also going to be adding an if-else structure that's going to determine the program response based on the value of the user key. So we'll say if the user key equals 37, so we call the format puzzle function using the left letter as the parameter value. We also have these for the right, the up, the down. Some other of these we'll use in here will be calling the switch top direction parameter function. We also use a way to delete the content of the current letter. So going through this, we're going to say if the user key is 37, it's going to call the format puzzle, and it's going to pass the left letter into the parameters of the format puzzle. And each one of these is going to be either the up letter, right letter, down letter being pushed on. The switch top direction we have to create. We also look at see that if the code value is between 65 and 90, those are the letters that are A through Z. It's going to write that character into the cell. It's going to change the text value of the current letter to the value returned by the get character function. And it's going to use the user key as a parameter. So we see we have a get character function, and the user key is what's being pressed on the keyboard, and it's being passed on to that function. Okay, so let's take a look at where we're at now. So we have some buttons here. They're not really working right now. You see that we have the ability to click into these, but nothing can be typed into that at this point. Also, after the if-else structure, we're going to enter a command that's going to prevent the browser from performing the default action in response to a keyboard event. So in here, I'm going to put a prevent default method that will stop the default keyboard events from happening into the keyboard, into the puzzle. So now I've got to create, as we see here, we got our get character function's already been created down here. Now I've got to create the top direction. And actually, I've got every bit of this in the wrong pre-formatted function. So I'm going to cut this out, put it in the correct place. Then we're going to the create font, the switch top direction. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to declare the variable of top image. And I'm going to have it go point to the element with the ID of direction image. So we got the variable top image. And here we're saying it's in the document. We'll get element by ID. And then this is the parameter being passed along. Now we're going to create an if-else statement. It's going to test the value of the top direction global variables. So in here, we got if the top direction is right, then it's going to change the top direction to down. It's going to change the top image to the PC right PNG. It's also going to change the current letter style background color to the red color. If it's not If this statement's not true, this set of commands will be ran instead. So now that we've created the top direction, we'll go back up to our init function. So now we're going to add this in so that the users can change direction by the keyboard or by clicking the pointer on the image. This image here. Okay, so this will be from hitting my space bar. You can see it changes. It will also allow me to do this with clicking on the image when I add this in. Okay, let me get to the correct place in my document. There we go. Get some space here. The first thing I do is I'm going to declare the variable top image, and I'm setting it to the get element by ID with direct image being passed into the parameters. I'm going to change the cursor to pointer, and then on click, I'm going to tell it to switch top directions. I'm going to run that function. So refresh this. We see that when I click on this, it now changes. And also when I use the space bar on my keyboard, it will change that image as well. All right, let's do some checks on these and clear some of these off. It's been a while since we checked the update on this. You can also click the menu button here and check them off as well. Once again, the reason this is not checking off is I don't have my closing curly brackets here. Because I am not done with this function. So I'll add those here at the end in the next couple steps. Okay, let me find where I was at in the instructions. All right, so the next part of the instructions says Bernard wants users to be able to briefly view their mistakes. We're going to add an on-click event handler to the init function. It's going to run the following commands when the user clicks the show errors button. It's going to loop through all of the items in the all letters collection. The text contains contents of an item does not match the value of the letters dataset.letter property. It's going to change the color style of the letter to red. Also, this after a 3-second interval, it's going to set the color for all the items in the all letters collection to an empty text string, restoring the letters to default. Okay, so first of all, we'll look through and we're going to add the event handler. We'll look at the get element ID and the show errors on click. So once the user clicks, the event handler is going to call this function. And it's going to loop through. So we're going to use a for loop. In this for loop, it's going to go through the length of all letters. It's going to be increased each time it runs through the value of the variable I. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come in and say if the value, the element of I of all letters does not match the data set letter, we're going to change that color style to red. Then we're going to set the 3-second timeout. We're going to set the timeout function. So we're going to say after 3 seconds, which is what's indicated here. It's going to run through this for each element, and it's going to set it to an empty text string to the default color. So next we're going to complete this init function by adding on click event that's going to show this show solution button. So in response to this click event, as we see that we just created a click event up here that called in the show errors. In this case, we're going to do one that calls in the show solution. We're going to run through the for loop. And in here, we're going to set the text content for each square in this crossword puzzle. It's going to be set to the letter. So it's going to show you the solution. And we're going to do the check off on all these. So if I have issues like this, this is normally your issue, is that you've got brackets somewhere that you shouldn't have. In this case, that is my spare bracket right there. That stray bracket was causing the issue. So syntax in JavaScript is in any programming, is very important that you make sure that you have, if you have an open bracket, you have a closing bracket, curly braces, parentheses. You want to make sure that you have opening and closing. If you have a stray one, it will cause issues. All right, so now it's tells us to verify this. We see that at this point, though, we have finished this. So we will just go through the verifying, showing that we can select boxes. And we can type in with this, and we can change the direction for these using the keyboard and the mouse. So our show error works, show solution works to give us our answers for this. Now our show errors, let me refresh this again. As soon as it loads, to the timeout on these. We see that we are in red, 3, 2, 1, and now we're back to black. All right, so that's how our intervals worked on that. Okay, so once again, this is not one of the problems that are assigned to you, but this is very similar to what you're working through for chapter 11.